Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first live event organized as part of the McGill World Restart a Heart, or WRAH, 2022 campaign, a global initiative that aims to increase public awareness and rates of bystander CPR. This campaign is student-led and faculty-supported within the Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences at McGill University. Our 2022 campaign seeks to further disseminate bystander resuscitation knowledge and skills across the community in Canada and abroad. Specifically, this year's campaign will prioritize funding efforts for CPR awareness and will emphasize CPR education to the youth. My name is Naomi Malka, and I'm a third-year medical student at McGill University and the Ambassador Relations Lead of the McGill World Restart a Heart campaign. We have the privilege of being joined by leaders in out-of-hospital cardiac arrest survival and CPR awareness. Our guests today have made tremendous efforts in improving cardiac resuscitation outcomes. Through their personal experience and scientific research, we will learn about the multifaceted road to recovery for cardiac arrest survivors and those who witness or perform CPR.
Hi, everyone. My name is Saad, and I'm a second-year medical student at McGill University and the External Relations Lead of the McGill World Restart a Heart 2022 campaign. First, I'd like to begin by introducing our speakers. So starting off with Katrysha Gellis, who is a cardiac arrest survivor. She went into cardiac arrest while at work and received CPR from her coworkers. She's now a CPR instructor and founder of Living Proof CPR training. McGill WRAH is lucky to have her as a member of the WRAH steering committee. Next, we have Dr. Katie Dante, who is a qualitative and mixed method scientist, a research chair in patient-centered outcomes at North York General Hospital, the assistant professor in the Institute of Health Policy. She earned her PhD from the University of Toronto. She's also a co-chair of the Public Engagement Committee of the Canadian Resuscitation Outcomes Consortium. And her research has included evaluating survivor perspectives on long-term outcomes after cardiac arrest and lay responder experiences in out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. Last but not least, we have Kelsey Tibbo, who is an operations manager at McGill University, a part-time firefighter for the municipality of Coteau-du-Lac, and a cardiac arrest bystander on our very own McGill campus. To start off our panel, I'd like to first share a special video created by members of our student and steering committees during the 2020 campaign on how to respond to cardiac arrest. In the next 60 seconds, I invite you to learn how to save a life.
In Canada alone, every 12 minutes, someone suffers from a cardiac arrest. If you don't do anything, they are going to die. In the next 60 seconds, we're going to teach you how to save a life.
If you see someone lying unconscious, the first thing you want to do is check if they're responsive. If they are not responsive and not breathing or breathing abnormally, they are likely suffering from a cardiac arrest.
Call 911, let them know that someone suffered from a cardiac arrest, send someone to find an AD if there's one nearby, and then start chest compressions.
For chest compressions, find the center of the chest, put your dominant hand down, interlock your fingers, and push hard and push fast.
Using an AED is really easy. You just apply the pads, turn on the machine, and follow the voice instruction. The machine will analyze the rhythm and tell you if a shock is recommended.
Before addressing our first speaker, Katrysha Gellis, we would like to show a video sharing her experience as a survivor of cardiac arrest.
I am Patricia Gillis, a sudden cardiac arrest survivor. My colleagues told me that one moment I was eating lunch with them and the next I was unconscious and not breathing on the floor. Nobody really knew it at the time, but I had suffered a sudden cardiac arrest. I feel very fortunate because I was in the right place at the right time with colleagues who did exactly what you're supposed to do, and because of their actions, they saved my life, and I'm here talking to you today. Luckily, there was a team of firemen who happened to be finishing a call around the corner. They were at the scene within a couple minutes with a defibrillator, and they attached it to my body, and they shocked me twice, and my heart was able to be restarted, and they saved my life. Sudden cardiac arrest is just that, it's sudden. It doesn't have any warning signs. It can happen to anyone at any time. It doesn't discriminate. And it's not just something that happens to older people. It can happen to somebody who's young. I was 30 years old when it happened to me. I wish that people don't have to be in the right place at the right time to survive a sudden cardiac arrest. I really hope that my story will inspire people to empower themselves with the knowledge of how to do CPR and how to use an automated external defibrillator, because they could be the difference for someone. They could make a difference. They could save a life. And I'm living proof of that.
Trisha, thank you for joining us tonight. You survived cardiac arrest at the age of 30. One of WRAH's main objectives is spreading awareness of the prevalence of cardiac arrest and the story of survivors. Can you tell us about your experience undergoing cardiac arrest and the recovery process? What was your biggest barrier returning to normalcy after such a life-changing event?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you to the students who lead the WRAH initiative. I think it's an amazing initiative, one that I'm proud to be part of. So thank you for asking me to be here tonight. I'm always happy to share my story when I think it will inspire people to learn CPR and empower themselves with that kind of knowledge. So my story, I mean, you heard it in the video, so that kind of did my job. But I had actually 2 cardiac arrests. So one was in 2015, that was the initial. And then I had one recently in January, actually, where my heart stopped, and the device that I have that was implanted to shock me if I have an arrest again, it worked and it saved me. So my story really was it's pretty unexpected that I would collapse and have a cardiac arrest like that. But I was so fortunate that I was with people who knew what to do, and I was at the right place at the right time. So many people aren't. And many survivors that I talk to, we all have the same kind of story where somebody knew what to do. There was an AED, and we're part of that lucky, 10% that survive. I would say for me, the first experience was a little bit less challenging in that I don't remember anything. And the second one, I remember everything. So it was extremely traumatic. So I have 2 varying perspectives on this. And I would say that my recovery process, kind of started all over again this year in 2019, because I didn't expect this to happen again. And I thought I had put it behind me. But what I've learned is that it's really like a slow healing journey. So it's not linear. It's definitely up and down. And it takes time. So some days feel really fine. And some days I don't feel great. It's kind of like you just got to do one day at a time, one step in front of the other, and just continue on that journey of healing. It's an interesting question. How did I return to normalcy? So normalcy implies that things go back to the way they should be. And I would say that life doesn't really go back to normal the way it should be for a survivor. I think you can, if you're fortunate, you can really live a fulfilling, wonderful, happy life post-cardiac arrest. And that certainly is the goal. But after you experience a trauma, like a sudden cardiac arrest is a real trauma, it just takes a lot of time to heal. And it really does not go back to normal the way you're used to right away. So for me, the biggest challenge was giving myself the patience and the time I needed physically and mentally to heal from this. Because, I was traumatized, especially the second time. I wanted to feel fine. I wanted to go back to my life. I wanted to go back to the things I was doing, but I really couldn't. I needed the time to process everything. This time, to be honest, the first cardiac arrest, I honestly felt okay right away. It took after about a year, I started to have these kind of feelings where I needed to talk to someone and I had to deal with it. But in January, I was just completely traumatized right away. And it took me about 3 months, to go back to actually feeling like myself again. And I was really sad about it because I didn't like the way I was feeling. As a survivor, we face new things when you live with a heart condition. If you've had a heart attack, if you've had an arrhythmia, if you had a cardiac arrest, so maybe you've had open heart surgery, maybe you have to take medication now and it makes you dizzy or tired. Some people deal with cardiac depression and anxiety, and that certainly was the case for me. Some people have injuries in their brain, so they may have issues with short-term memory, or just doing daily tasks is hard. If you receive a defibrillator like I did that was implanted, now you have to learn how does it work? You have to do the follow-ups. You have to think about what is it like if I have another arrhythmia? What's the shock going to be like? What do I do after that? How do you deal with that stuff? If you're an active person like I was, there's a challenge in understanding what you can and can't do for exercise and how that works. And there's just limitations to be aware of. So the other thing too, I've spoken to survivors and maybe they can't go back to the job that they were doing because they're not allowed to because they have a medical device now. So all these things are things that are, part of life. They're not normal anymore. And they're things that take time to process and accept them. And I heard something recently about, grief. So I think that really when you have a cardiac arrest, you have to grieve, the loss of the life you had, and you have this new life that you have to build and work really hard to get back to. And I heard that grieving is something that, when you have grief, it doesn't really go away. Your life can grow around it. And certainly that's been kind of the case for me. And I think that this will always be something that's part of me. It will never not have happened to me, but I'm kind of trying to learn how to move forward with it. So that's where I'm at. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, of course. Thank you for sharing that with us. Katie, your research on life after surviving cardiac arrest is fascinating. And historically, the measure of success for cardiac arrest has been survival, as measured by the proportion of patients discharged alive from the hospital. However, in your research, you highlight the need for measurements of success for cardiac arrest survivors to extend beyond the critical illness episode and into various psychological aspects of patients' recovery. What drove you to focus on such a unique and understudied area of healthcare?
That's a really good question. I think it's people like Trisha. When I came to the resuscitation field, it was cardiac arrest was very interesting to me, but I was a qualitative researcher. And so right away, I was just really taken with the stories, just like Trisha's and others that I've heard over the years. And it actually, not to make a pun, but it broke my heart that they, weren't really being heard. And so, my job as a qualitative researcher is really to give voice to people's experiences so that we can do better in the healthcare system. And, my standard line is, people leave the hospital after cardiac arrest, after acute treatment. And I mean, obviously survival is the number one goal. So we don't want to take away from that outcome, but they kind of leave the hospital, and people often will say, survivors will tell me that they hear, "Congratulations, you lived. Go have a nice life," and that's true. We want them to have a nice life, but no one really prepares them for a bit of the journey that Trisha talked about. The journey that's going to happen, and so for me, I was really taken that we dropped the ball as a healthcare system on that piece. And that, we can do better, and that the people who can tell us how to do it better are the people that experience it every day, the survivors and their families. And, the term has come up recently about co-survivorship. So people's families, in the cases of spouses and partners and children and mothers and fathers, are equally impacted by cardiac arrest in different ways, but they're also part of the equation. And so for me, I think I'm driven by doing better for people and creating a system that supports them throughout their journey and not just in that acute sort of care phase. So.
Thank you very much. That was very well said. And you put it that way. It's surprising that more people have not already researched this problem area. I'd like to discuss your research in a bit more detail. Can you explain what constitutes a good recovery from a psychological perspective? And can you also explain what steps survivors can take to achieve these good outcomes?
So, I think a good outcome is different for everyone. I can't necessarily say what that is, but I think in general, what I like to say is that a good outcome recognizes that there's a heart-brain connection. And so it's just, we often focus on the heart and we get the heart going. And again, obviously, and back to where it's supposed to be. And people, follow up with their cardiologist if necessary, or they receive a device like Trisha did. And that's that part of the system is pretty well intact, and we have measures around that. But that heart-brain connection and this idea that when your heart stops, your brain also gets impacted. And so I think good recovery includes paying attention to and drawing attention to the impact on the brain and the sort of psychosocial impact. I think Tricia said it really well when she said, every part of your life is impacted. And so even though your heart might feel okay and maybe physically you feel better, there's a huge impact to your psychology of dying and coming back to life, of who you are, reevaluating priorities, returning to work. Many people are sort of, very engrossed in their work, and that might change. How your family, your relationships, how you engage in social life, and that all changes. And so I think a good outcome is just one that pays attention to all of those components of health. So a very holistic approach, which is, the title of today's panel. But I do, not to be cheeky, but I think a holistic approach to good outcomes is really what's most important, and has not, until recently, has not been brought to attention for cardiac arrest survivors and their families.
Thank you. So now that we understand the steps and what survivors can pay attention to achieve these good outcomes, I'd like to turn to more systemic dimensions of treatment for cardiac arrest survivors. Is there anything the medical system can do to improve the psychological recovery of cardiac arrest survivors?
So again, I think it's all about awareness, right? So often, folks are discharged from an ICU or from a medical ward, and they were treated for their cardiologic problem or their cardiac problem, but they haven't really actually been seen by the system or for their psychology or their psychologic impact. And so I think awareness about that and, necessary referrals or just even letting people know that over the course of the next few months or to a year, you may have ups and downs. You may, feel differently at different points in time, and that you should seek out help for that, I think, is the number one thing. I think integrated care, which is a really popular word right now in the healthcare system, I think is truly the answer. So identifying that, currently, not to slug the healthcare system, but currently we're quite siloed, right? You get treated in acute care, and then you maybe go to primary care, but the other parts of the system are quite siloed from each other. So really focusing on integration across that journey, I think, will be really, really important. I'm sad to say that right now we don't have a coordinated support system for cardiac arrest survivors and their families. And so I am part of a team that's working on that work. And I hope that the next time we have this panel in a couple of years, we'll be able to share something that we can have, especially with all the digital and virtual care options now. I can confidently say 90% of the survivors I talk to have never met another survivor. And so at the very least, being able to connect survivors with people that they can connect with and feel a shared common experience with would be a win. Because even that, I think, is really psychologically supportive. And I also want to mention that we can't forget about the family members and often they're referred to as caregivers in the healthcare system, because, often the focus is all on survivors, which is very important, but they also need help and treatment and support after something like this. And the third group that I also have a significant interest in is actually bystanders or lay responders who respond to public cardiac arrests. These folks, we call them to action. We train them in CPR and we want them to help. And then we sort of drive away in the ambulance and leave them standing there, right? Without thinking that they've also had some trauma. They've also seen something they never thought that they would see. So I think that systemically, there is three groups of people that we need to work really hard to build support and help them navigate the time following cardiac arrest better than we do now.
Thank you. That was very insightful. Tricia, research shows that after survivors of cardiac arrest are released from the hospital, they experience significantly higher risk of psychological distress, such as depression, anxiety, PTSD. And Dr. Dainty's research showcases that survivors report that healthcare providers paid little attention to the psychological impact of cardiac arrest after patients discharged from the hospital. So do you feel that the psychological impact of your cardiac arrest was adequately addressed by your healthcare providers? And were you offered resources for psychological support? And if you were, what did you think about the quality of the resources provided? Based on your experience, what would you like to see more of on the part of healthcare professionals in the way of mental health support services from cardiac arrest post-discharge?
That's a good, long question. I'm happy to answer it. I honestly think a lot of what Katie said is just some of the things I was going to say. She said already, so that's really good. We're on the same page, exactly. I think for me, I'm one of the fortunate people. I think the way that the support is for survivors after, I had some of the best care that I think you could hope for based on what is available now. So I'm really grateful for the support I received. Talking to other survivors, some of them never received not even an ounce of what I got. So, I mean, there's always room for improvement, right? But I was definitely offered, I had two significant events. One was in Montreal, one was in Toronto. And, it kind of varies from place to place, what kind of support you receive. Some have really good programs and some have nothing and some have okay stuff. So Montreal, I was able to speak to a psychologist as much as I wanted, as many times as I wanted. They had a cardio rehabilitation program. So they kind of let you talk to, that you go to this kind of big atrium and they tell you, here's the resources we have. And it was really psychological. It was a kinesiologist to help me get back into working out and a nutritionist. So I had a lot of support. And they kind of did mention, there's things that you might feel that, you might have all these issues, right? So that was great for me. But people don't necessarily get that. In Toronto, I was still able to see a psychologist because I told them I wasn't feeling great and they offered that to me. But I don't think it was something they were going to necessarily recommend to me. And I didn't have the ability to see, there's no one that I was referred to try and help me get back into working out properly without being worried about it. So that just shows you kind of the difference. I think, honestly, what Katie said, that's exactly what I was feeling too. What would I like to see more of as part of healthcare? I think it would be amazing if we just had an international standard of care for post-cardiac arrest survivors and their families. So if that was the case, then that would help a lot of people. I think there's so many good doctors. My doctor, I can't say enough good things about my cardiologist, but I think it would be really great if all doctors would know that it's really good that when they discharge their patients, encourage them to know that it's extremely normal if they don't feel like themselves again, that they may feel nothing, but they may feel all kinds of things and experience challenges. So I think if we were able to do that, we're not setting the expectation that they have to feel okay and go back to life right away. They have the permission to take the time, whatever that means, however long that means for them to heal and just to feel how they feel. I think also what would be amazing is if, when I left the hospital, I didn't really know any survivors. I didn't have any resources. I didn't have much. I found that over years and years of doing research myself and meeting people. But it would be amazing if everyone that left the hospital and their families was given here's these resources for you. So things like, here's the groups online, here's groups in person that you can talk to people. Because most survivors just want to talk to someone else who understands, the people that I've met. Reading materials to understand what happens during a sudden cardiac arrest, what happened to them, what happened to your family. Because I just wanted to know, I kept asking my friends and family, what happened? Tell me the whole story. I just wanted to know what happened, and often it's traumatic for them to revisit that. So having something to understand what you went through is helpful. Having access to a psychologist, anywhere you are for free, that's included in healthcare, is just one of the best things that I think they can do for people. Also maybe providing a list of any organizations that are out there doing things in resuscitation, because a lot of people, sometimes they feel the need to give back. Maybe they want to do nothing, and that's totally fine. But sometimes people want to get involved and they don't know where to start. So just knowing what other people are doing and seeing what are their skills and how can they join in to do something good with their negative experience. I think it's very common, as Katie said, for people to hear you're so lucky to be alive, go back to your life, go back to, you lived. And I think that we agree, we are lucky given the statistics, and the goal is to go back to life and live a meaningful life. But if you don't leave room to deal with the trauma you experienced, then it's just not going to be resolved. And sudden cardiac arrest, any medical experience, it can be a trauma too, just like any other trauma. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. So I think we need to have the room to feel comfortable to just feel how we feel and heal in whatever way that kind of means for us. One of the most useful pieces of advice that I received, and it was this year recently when I was just feeling so down, from a friend of mine who's also a survivor. And he said to me, he said, would you be mad at yourself if you couldn't walk because you had a cast, because you had a broken leg and you were healing from a broken leg? And I said, no. He said, well, then, you can't be mad at yourself. This was an injury. A sudden cardiac arrest is an injury in every way, and it's an invisible injury. So you need to give yourself time to heal from that too. So I think like hearing that and knowing like, okay, that really helped me and gave me the ability to take the time to heal from that. So it would be good if that was really encouraged by the healthcare system right away, because then it would, alleviate a lot of people's distress about why they don't feel themselves. That's my answer.
Thank you for sharing your perspective, Katrysha. It's definitely motivating as a future healthcare professional to know what we as a system need to work on. We'll now turn our attention to address the bystander's perspective on cardiac arrest. Kelsey, recent research has revealed numerous reasons that prevent people who witness cardiac arrest from performing CPR. Reasons include panic, fear of improperly administering CPR, fear of litigation, fear of infection from mouth to mouth, and more. For these reasons, the probability that a lay responder performs CPR on a stranger is just over 50%. In May of 2022, you resuscitated a person suffering from cardiac arrest on McGill campus. Could you tell us about your experience administering CPR on that day? Could you also explain what led you to perform this heroic act, despite all the reasons the literature says other bystanders don't perform CPR?
Hi, thank you for having me. And I just wanted to say it's a pleasure being here with you, Trisha and Katie, and listening to your story, especially as a bystander who intervenes in medical emergencies. For me, it was a normal day at work. It's usually always busy on campus, so lots of different things happening. And normally I'm not in the operations center. It would be the security agents that are there. And for some reason, I was busy. I needed to go into the operations center, and I overheard a call coming in to the office from an off-duty security agent who was on his way to the campus to advise us that on the northern part of our campus, we had an incident where at first they thought it was a gentleman who had been hit by a car. And so we were already starting to mobilize our patroller to get on site to provide first aid when a second call came in, and it just so happened that I was the one to pick up the phone. And I could hear the panic in my off-duty security agent's voice. And he couldn't give me straight details. I could hear sort of like a bit of a chaotic situation behind him. And I just said, is the person conscious? Is he responding? And he wasn't able to give that answer right away. And so for me, I knew that something was wrong and that we needed to get there as soon as possible. So just as our patroller was walking out of the office, I told him, wait, I'm going to come with you. I had this gut feeling that something was very wrong. Sometimes I'm wrong. I guess that day I wasn't, and I was fortunate to head up there. And so we got in the patrol car and we got to the scene. And that's when I saw another bystander, a fellow bystander, who was with the victim, who was laying down on the ground. And she was attempting to provide chest compressions, which I could see even from the patrol car weren't necessarily deep enough. They didn't look to be the right depth and speed. So right away, I grabbed the medical kit that we have in our car. And at McGill, we're very fortunate. The security patrollers have defibrillators in the medical bags in our patrol cars, as well as our buildings. So the call to 911 was confirmed. It was already placed, and as well as people who were already on scene. And I was very fortunate to have a second bystander with me who was an off-duty Montreal firefighter who had a pocket mask that he had on his person, and he was trying to give breaths to the person. So right away, I took out the defibrillator and I said, I have a defibrillator, cut off his shirt. So we cut off his shirt. We applied the pads to the gentleman's chest. And the beauty of a defibrillator, like we all learn in our first aid courses, is it's very simple to use. And the steps, they walk you through it right away. So we applied it to the gentleman's chest, and I started to do compressions while waiting for the machine to do its analyze. And once it did its analysis, It told me shock was advised. And just like on TV, I felt the great power to yell clear to make sure everybody was not around the patient. And lucky enough, it only required one shock to the gentleman, and we were already able to detect a pulse. And he was trying to breathe on his own, so we continued to give breaths. I would say it took about 5 or 6 minutes from that initial call to get on scene with the defibrillator. And since arriving on scene, I would say it was roughly another 7 to 8 minutes before the first responders arrived. So if we put that time frame together, the initial 5-6 minutes that it took for us to get there, plus the 7 minutes for the first responders, still a decent amount of time before they arrive on scene, they get out of their truck, they get their equipment, and they tend to the patient. So I think Tricia said it best. She was fortunate to be in the right place at the right time. And so was this gentleman. He couldn't have asked to choose a better location than, McGill campus with defibrillators in the patrol vehicles and 2 off-duty firefighters ready to intervene. So I think it was another classic case of right time, right place for both the gentleman and myself. You asked what were, the reasons that led me to intervene. I can honestly say it would be the 12 years of training in my career as a police officer, as a firefighter. From a young age, I knew that I wanted to give back to my community. I was also, I was sick as a baby and I wasn't supposed to survive. And so when listening to my mom tell me all about what I went through and how I was very lucky to be here, I knew I wanted to give back. And I knew that at a young age. And so the second I turned 18, I signed up to be a volunteer firefighter. And it's in me to want to be there to help people and to give back. And I really do feel like the 12 years that I've spent as a firefighter was that push that I needed to feel confident enough to intervene, as well as depending on all the training that I've received to really be there for when, I'm nervous and I want to make sure that I'm doing everything that I'm supposed to. Whereas deep down inside of me, I just relied on that training and I felt confident enough to intervene and ultimately play a great role in this gentleman's life.
Wow. Well, thank you very much for sharing your experience. We're grateful to have your service as a Samaritan. Finally, what tips do you have for other potential bystanders for overcoming some of the fears we talked about?
For sure, I've spoken to some of my fellow firefighters, as well as the security agents that we have on campus. So I was accompanied by another security agent who was there. And I had asked him, I said, do you think if I weren't here, if it happened, after hours when I wasn't at the office anymore, do you think that you would have confidently been able to intervene? And he looked at me and he said, I don't know. I don't think so. Like, you got there and you knew what to do and you were confident. You didn't seem scared. I don't think I would have that confidence. And so I asked him why. And he just said, well, I'm afraid that I might do something wrong. That I might, I might not apply it properly, or I might not do CPR in the correct manner, not deep enough, not give the right breaths. And so I kind of looked at him and I said, but do you realize by not doing anything, his chance of survival is 0%. Whereas as long as you try and you make sure that you're safe at the limit, whatever you do to try and help this person is already better than not doing anything at all. And he said, you're right. I didn't think of that. And I said, if anything, if you don't have the proper equipment, like a pocket mask to provide breaths, well, at least the chest compressions are already a great start in making sure that the blood is still circulating and you're keeping the organs alive in the time that maybe another person, such as myself on that day, arrives ready to intervene and feels confident. So I really think that it's important that people trust the training that they receive when they take their first aid course. That's already a great step in becoming a bystander assistant in these cases. And it's really just trusting that training that we receive, really paying attention in class, like when they ask for, I want to volunteer to show chest compressions, step up and really test it out. That's the great environment to get out those fears and to practice in a safe environment. So I think that that's really the most important thing, is just relying on that training and knowing that no matter what you do, no matter what you try, it's already a step in, this person's survival rate. Whereas if you do nothing, then for sure he or she won't have a chance.
Yeah, thank you for sharing these tips. I feel that confidence, the one that what you displayed during this event, is something that is so important in these circumstances, and it's often something that people don't really appreciate. So thank you for sharing this. Next, Katie, I like to discuss a little bit about your research, which discusses the psychological trauma lay responders experience after administering CPR. These responders' reaction range from feeling physically numb, tired, and drained to self-blaming for not having provided sufficient CPR. You found that their thoughts after the event also included curiosity, questioning their personal capability, and recognizing the significant differences between classroom training and real-life events. These psychological impacts of cardiac arrest on bystanders are often overlooked, but they are significant and must be addressed. In your view as a researcher in this field, what preventative measures can be taken to minimize the psychological impacts of administering CPR for lay responders?
That's a loaded question. But, I think it actually starts with the last piece that you mentioned about, how we train people. So I think there's a couple of things. I think we have to recognize that not everybody is going to have the confidence that Kelsey had. We can't expect everybody to have that, but we are calling people to action, right? And not to overstate it, but we're actually calling them to war almost. We're calling them to do something that for a really long time was viewed as a medical act, right? Like something that only a doctor or nurse or someone trained in medicine could administer. Or at the other side of it, we required people to have a card in their wallet that said they knew what they were doing. For a long time, AEDs had a sign on the front that said to be used by emergency medical personnel only. And so we've created a culture where people are afraid to respond because they don't know what they're doing. And I think we have to really flip that on its head. I think we have to start with how we train people, make it more realistic, make it more like what they're going to see. We don't very often come across a cardiac arrest victim who's lying flat on a hard surface in an air-conditioned room with someone there telling us what to do, right? So we really need to think about that in how we train and how we talk about training. I think we need to make CPR training a social expectation. It's just something that everybody in society knows how to do. The places where we have really good lay responder response rates, so places like Seattle, Washington, and Denmark, and places like that have shown that they can raise bystander rates, it's really about making it part of the social fabric. It's what people just know how to do. In Denmark, you have to take CPR before you can renew your driver's license. So building it into societal expectations like that, I think is amazing. It's brilliant. And I think, you won't always convince everybody to be that person that takes charge the way Kelsey did and the way others have, but there are different pieces of the response that people can be part of. If you just call 911, that's just as important. If you just are the person that runs and gets but if you are the person that goes to get AED, that's okay. Doesn't mean you have to be able to put it on or do CPR. If you're, someone who says, I think that's a cardiac arrest, and then someone else takes over, that's a big part of it. So we have to recognize that psychologically, there's going to be different people at different stages. And so we can't expect everybody to be the person that jumps in and does CPR and uses the AED. But if we can get more people to that point, because understanding what's happening and how they can respond and that person will die if you don't help, I think that's a messaging. It's almost a marketing campaign, right? That we need to invest in more and take away the stigma of it being something that's a medical act or that people can't do. And I think that the sooner that we move towards that and towards making training more realistic I think that we will be able to reduce that. It will always be traumatizing. You know, I work in this field all the time. Kelsey's a firefighter. Katrysha's a survivor. If we came across somebody, we would still be traumatized, right? Even my emergency medicine physicians or my intensive care physicians, you know, you guys, medical students who talk about this stuff all the time, you know, you're still going to have a level of trauma. So I think the other piece of that is that support system, building that support system and recognizing that it's traumatic and having resources for lay responders who act in any way, or even just witness, even if they just are petrified and stand there and just witness the arrest. You know, having that support system in place is going to move us a lot further ahead of getting ahead of the psychological impact. And certainly events like you guys have at McGill, the amazing World Restart a Heart Day event that you guys have created a culture around cardiac arrest. And so we need to spread that culture.
Thank you. That was very informative and useful, not only just for myself, but also the public listening in. You cover a lot of different perspectives and aspects of intervening during a cardiac arrest. Kelsey, I'd like to ask you about your perspective on Katie's research as a bystander of cardiac arrest. Katie's research explains that many responders of cardiac arrest describe the experience as stressful and traumatic. And although the event is not specifically identified as PTSD, many responders describe experiencing persistent mental recurrences of the out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. Could you tell us about what you felt after administering CPR at McGill a few months ago?
I think I could honestly describe it similar to what Tricia said. It wasn't a linear experience that I had. So it was definitely, there were ups and downs. So like right away after the event, I guess it was still sort of an adrenaline rush that it had just happened. I went back to the office with the off-duty security agent who was on scene and had witnessed it and was already showing signs of distress and confusion, as well as the patroller that I had gone up with. And right away I said, everybody, we're stopping. We're going to take 5, 10, 15, the amount of time that we need. We're going to sit down and we're going to have a debrief and we're going to talk about what happened. And if you guys have questions, you know, I want you to ask them now, because I think my role as an operations manager and having a team below me, I wasn't just thinking about how I was feeling. I was automatically kicking in as that supervisory role and thinking, how are my agents feeling? I knew that this wasn't the first time that I had witnessed, you know, someone who was dying or was dead and came back. I've experienced that, unfortunately, numerous times, countless times as a firefighter. My immediate concern was for my team. And so I said, you know, we're going to sit here and I want you to tell me how you're feeling. We're going to talk this through. And I was still on that adrenaline rush. And so they were just saying, well, you know, like I was confused, like he was gone. And then all of a sudden he's breathing and there's police and there's fire and there's ambulance and there's cars and there's like people passing by. And it just seemed chaotic. And meanwhile, you're just like, yep, defib, put it on, compressions, breaths, you go over here, everything was calm. So we had a good talk as a team. And I said, you know, right now, how you're feeling, you might not feel that way later. So if you need to talk later tonight, tomorrow, reach out to me, reach out to your peers. That's definitely important. And then about an hour later, I found myself at my CrossFit gym at my normal time with my 2 training partners. And I think that's when I finally like came down from that adrenaline rush. And I was like, did that just happen? Like, here I am wrapping up my day on campus, saying goodbye, checking in with my people. And then all of a sudden there's this incident and it's like, you know, Katie said, call to arms, call to war. We're heading out and it's a complete different experience. And so I think talking with my 2 partners at the gym and then, you know, talking to my mom after and explaining like, oh, how was your day at work? Thinking the regular contractors, construction, this and that. And then it's like, nope, that's not the day. And then even the next day it was, I remember waking up and I'm like, that really did happen. Like that really did happen. So I really think it's like Tricia explained from her perspective, it's not linear. There were really ups and downs where it's like, yeah, it happened and we did it and we talked. And then the next day I was like, did that actually happen? So I really think that it was ups and downs for a good amount of time after.
Thank you, Kelsey. Despite the stress that many understandably experience after administering CPR, many of these responders frequently leave the scene without any formal post-event support. Did you receive any post-event support, be it formal support from healthcare professionals or informal support from friends and relatives? If so, could you describe the support you received? If not, could you describe the type of support you would have liked to receive?
So following the incident, I didn't have any formal support. So there wasn't someone from McGill that reached out and said, you went through this. Do you need to talk? Do you want to explain how you feel? There definitely wasn't that formal, support from McGill. But then again, I also didn't reach out for support. I think my security agents got a little bit more of that from my perspective, but that's more because, again, I'm basing my response out of my experience. So having had traumatic events happen on the fire department and having to go through those steps of post-traumatic stress, I knew what it felt like to be on that receiving end. So I automatically wanted to take care of my security agents and make sure that they were okay, especially knowing that this is their first time that they've ever gone through something like this. But I really think that, like we mentioned earlier, there's that formal support needed to not just the survivor who goes through it, but also, like Katie mentioned, the family. It's the family also lives through this experience with them, as well as the bystander. So I think that really more formal support afterwards and having that discussion would definitely prove beneficial. I know that for myself, not from this incident, but from a past incident, where I struggled and I didn't sleep for many days, and I went through physical and physiological aspects of that incident. I know that had I responded the same way after this incident, more support definitely would have been needed. And I think it's something that we can really work on. I think McGill right away, I'm proud to say that just the fact that we have defibrillators in all of our buildings, well, the majority of our buildings, I think it's about 50 on campus, as well as in the patrol vehicles, is a great start. But there's also, that's one aspect of an incident like this, but then there's also that other aspect of the days later. What happens to the people who responded? I think what also helped was the next day we had a fire alarm on campus, and I had the fire department come and respond. And just talking with the guys that I knew there, they said, hey, we had a visit from that person's brother today at our fire station, and he's doing okay. He's in the hospital and he's got a long road ahead of him, but he's doing okay. And I think that was really what helped in this situation, because you don't get that answer most times. You don't find out what happened to that person once the ambulance doors close and the ambulance leaves. And I think it's an important part of that process that you go through in coming to terms with what happened. It's knowing that, what you did really did make a difference. And I think that truly helped me through the process of this incident.
Thank you for sharing your experience. It is really amazing that you were able to see, what ended up happening with the person that you saved. Trisha, you've made great strides in the field of cardiac arrest after surviving it yourself. Katie's research highlighted that a few survivors became inspired to educate others about cardiac arrest risk factors and treatment as a way of making their experience meaningful. I'd like to take this opportunity to ask you if you could share with us the different endeavors and roles you've taken on since your cardiac arrest. What drove you to pursue these new undertakings? And lastly, how have they contributed to your recovery?
Sure. So my cardiac arrest happened in 2015. So it's hard to believe it's been almost 7 years. It was actually October 16th, which is officially World Restart a Heart Day. So the first thing that I did was on the anniversary of the arrest on October 16th, 2016, I hired some people to come and teach my friends and family CPR and how to use an AED. I wanted that to be not a scary day for them. I wanted it to be something positive. And it was great. And everybody said how much they enjoyed it and how much they learned. And then I posted a couple pictures on Facebook, and a couple days later, I saw that 2 people I knew in the opposite ends of the country saw that and said, what a great idea. I'm going to do that in my community. So they did CPR classes too. And then that was it. I forgot about it. And then 3 years later was the anniversary again. And I was thinking, like, what can I do to make this day, something good? And I thought, well, I used to be a lifeguard and I kind of knew CPR. So maybe I could learn how to teach it. And I got certified with Heart and Stroke Foundation in 2018. And I started a little initiative and I called it Living Proof CPR training. And then on that day, October 16th, 2018, I trained my friends and family. I had them all, I rented out like a church basement and I taught them, and I got all the dummies and the AED trainers and everything. And then from there, I started teaching people, in the community, and I really found meaning in that. And I loved just teaching families because they really would want to learn, not because they needed a certification, because they really were interested and they thought this was a meaningful thing. So I started doing that. And I also started working, as an ambassador with Heart and Stroke Foundation, sharing my story whenever they would like, if it was helpful. And also with the Fondation Jacques de Champlain in Quebec that now has the official AED app of Quebec, which is great. So happy to be an ambassador for them. And then most recently, I heard about this company in Ontario that was doing outdoor defibrillator placements. And I thought that was super interesting. And I ended up calling them and talking to them, and they eventually hired me. The company is called Action First Aid. So I work with them now. I'm in Toronto. I moved to Toronto, and they're in Ontario. So they're really an amazing company, and they do first aid training and defibrillator sales. And they place 24/7 accessible safe stations all across North America. So that's the work that I'm doing now. I find it extremely meaningful. And, when I started doing this, what drove me to pursue learning how to teach CPR was that I wanted to pay it forward to my rescuers. And I thought that's the best way I could thank them, is if something I did maybe saves someone else one day. And just recently in June, I received an email from somebody I knew in Seattle, just outside of Seattle, and they had placed a safe station there with our help. And we saved a girl. She was 12 years old and she was playing soccer, and the AED saved her. I mean, the combination of AED and the person that did CPR and got the AED, just like Katie said, this whole chain of people that all knew they could do something. And then a couple of weeks later, we had another save in Sonoma, a boy that was 16. The AED was placed there by the mother of a little boy that had passed away from cardiac arrest at 16, playing basketball. And this little boy was 16 playing basketball, and he had the same name as the mother's son, the father's son that was lost. So that was extremely meaningful. And I had the opportunity to meet them recently. So, that's kind of what drove me to do this. And so that was amazing that, we saved, I didn't do it alone. It was with a huge initiative, but that was super meaningful for me. In terms of how it's contributed to my recovery, I think being in the resuscitation industry as a career, because I wasn't before, it's allowed me to really do something good with a bad situation. So that for me has been meaningful. I found meaning in, this is a horrible thing that happened to me and my family and my friends. And I was able to do something good with it. And that's kind of been something that I think has helped. It's difficult at times, not all great, because I'm constantly talking about CPR and AEDs and cardiac arrest, and it's all encompassing. So sometimes I do just have to take a break and step back and say, today I'm not talking about CPR, but, it's kind of this thing that it's the same as the recovery. It's like this journey that I'm on now. And, I think as Katie is involved with helping support survivors, I'm super interested in that as well. And as I speak to more survivors, I'm really learning about some of the struggles people have. So, I look forward to working, with Katie on some of the initiatives we're doing jointly now in terms of supporting survivors. This has been an extremely difficult and scary experience for me. But all in all, there's been so much good that has come from it for me that I would never wish this on myself or anyone, but I really, I can't imagine my life any other way now. I'm really proud of myself that I've tried to take something bad and turn it into something good, even though it's really hard sometimes. And I'm just kind of doing the best that I can with what I got. So that's kind of where I'm at with that.
Thank you for sharing. I think I could say that, at least for the communities that you've helped with your work, that we're very grateful for your contribution. So we've reached the end of this exciting live event, and I would like to express my appreciation to Dr. Katie Dainty, Ms. Kelsey Tibbo, and Ms. Katrysha Gellis for your illuminating perspectives on the psychosocial needs of survivors and bystanders of cardiac arrest, and most importantly, for your time. I want to take this opportunity to invite everyone to our next virtual event as part of the McGill WRAH 2022 campaign. On October 14th, we'll discuss pediatric cardiac critical care and sudden cardiac arrest awareness in the youth. And we will be joined by Dr. Farhan Banji, pediatric intensivist and chair of our steering committee, Dr. Katie Allen, a researcher in cardiac arrest at St. Michael's Hospital, as well as Dr. Mary McBride, pediatric cardiac intensivist. We hope you all can make it. For more information on our live events, such as dates and links, please make sure to visit our social media platforms and our website. Once again, thank you everybody for joining tonight.
Thanks, Naomi.
Thank you for having us.